On Christmas Eve, my husband told me we had to stay at his mother's house for the holidays. I had no choice but to cancel the trip to see my parents. Around midnight, he sent me a location pin from a hospital along with a text message. Mom passed away. Can you come see her one last time? That Christmas Eve. It was freezing. The wind howled through the narrow suburban cul-de-sac in Oak Park, making the string lights draped over the front porches tremble softly. Distant sounds of holiday music and laughter echoed from neighboring houses. Inside those homes, there was the familiar warm scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and fresh pine. But inside my husband's family home, the atmosphere was entirely different. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the massive roasting pan I had just pulled from the oven. My hands still greasy from the butter and herbs. In my 3 years of marriage, I was always the one who woke up the earliest, did the most work, yet was the one least noticed. My name is Lauren, and my husband is Michael. Michael was sitting on the living room sofa, watching a Christmas special on TV and laughing with his younger sister, Megan. The two of them were cracking open pistachios, leaving shells scattered all over the coffee table. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, Helen, would occasionally shoot a glaring look in my direction. "Lauren!" Helen called out sharply. I stood up immediately. "Yes, Mom? The gravy on the stove is probably drying out. Go check on it. It's bad luck to burn the food on Christmas Eve." "Yes, ma'am." I turned back to the kitchen. That had been my routine for the last 3 years. In this house, I was treated more like a live-in maid than a daughter-in-law. I used to think that if I was just patient and endured it, things would eventually get better. But there are things in life where the longer you endure them, the more people take your suffering for granted. The TV in the living room grew louder. The broadcast was counting down the final seconds to midnight to ring in Christmas Day. Everyone started counting. 10, 9, 8. I stood in the kitchen, watching the gravy bubble in the saucepan, feeling completely empty inside. 3 years ago, Michael pursued me with intense passion. He brought flowers to my office every day. Once, when it was pouring rain, he stood outside my apartment building for 2 hours just to walk me to my door. At the time, I thought I had met a truly good man. I didn't know that what he had his eyes on wasn't me, but my family. My parents owned a highly successful organic food manufacturing plant up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We weren't billionaires, but the business was very stable, pulling in several $1 million in revenue each year. Michael knew that. His whole family knew that. I was the only one in the dark. 3, 2, 1. A cheer erupted from the living room. "Merry Christmas!" I wiped my hands on a towel and walked out. Helen was handing out Christmas envelopes with cash to everyone. Michael got one. His sister Megan got one. Even Megan's little toddler got one. When it was my turn, Helen looked at me, gave a cold, dismissive smile, and handed what would have been my envelope to her grandson. "Here, let's give this to the little guy. You're already married into the family. What do you need allowance for?" Everyone laughed. I forced a smile too. It was the familiar, obedient smile I had practiced for 3 years. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime call from my mother. Michael frowned. "Go take that somewhere else. It's too noisy." I nodded and took my phone into the guest bedroom. As soon as the door clicked shut, I let out a long sigh. I accepted the call, and my mother's familiar face filled the screen. Behind her was the cozy living room of my childhood home. My dad was in the background, hanging a final ornament on the tree. "Lauren, honey, did you have Christmas dinner yet?" "Yes, Mom. Are you having a good time over there?" I smiled. "It's wonderful, Mom." I lied with practiced ease, but right at that moment, my mother's eyes froze. She stared intently at something on the screen, her face suddenly going pale and tense. "Lauren," her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "Don't turn around. My heart is pounding." "Mom, what's wrong?" My mother kept her eyes fixed on the screen, her voice barely audible. "Listen to me, but don't let anyone know." I froze. "Tell me, Mom." In a little while, Exactly at 2 a.m. Your father is coming to pick you up. I was stunned. What? Why? Don't ask questions. Just act completely normal. Do not let them suspect a thing. Cold sweat ran down my spine. Mom, what on earth is going on? My mother took a deep breath. Your husband's family is planning to steal our money. It felt like I had been struck in the head. What? They are setting up a fraudulent real estate investment shell. Your father has been hiring private investigators for the last 2 months, my mother said slowly, her voice trembling. They plan to borrow $300,000 from you, and then the whole family is going to flee to Dubai. I couldn't breathe. $300,000. It was true. Just half a month ago, Michael had brought it up. He said his uncle had a guaranteed, highly lucrative real estate deal. He told me to ask my parents for a little help to invest. I was still thinking about it. My mother's voice cracked. And what about you? She choked back a sob. They were planning to leave you behind to take the fall for the fraud. I stood dead still. Out in the living room, the sounds of laughter and Christmas carols continued cheerfully. But inside the bedroom, my entire body felt like ice. 3 years. 3 years of being a dutiful wife. 3 years of swallowing my pride, and in their eyes, I was nothing but a pawn, my mother whispered. Lauren, listen to me. At exactly 2 a.m., go out the back door. Your father will be waiting. The screen went dark. I stood in the middle of the room, my hands shaking. Just then, Michael's voice called out from the hallway. Lauren, where are you? I jolted, quickly looking in the mirror. I wiped away my tears, took a deep breath, and put on a smile. The obedient, sweet smile they were so used to seeing. I opened the door and stepped out. I'm right here. Michael looked at me. Mom said you should go back to your parents' house tomorrow to visit for the holidays. Helen gave a fake, sugary smile. Yes, Lauren. And while you're there, don't forget to ask your parents about that $300,000 for the investment. I bowed my head. Yes, Mom. I'll talk to them. Michael looked pleased. He had no idea that in just a few hours, I would be leaving this house forever. And this time, I wouldn't be leaving in tears. I sat back down in the living room just like always. The TV played classic Christmas movies. The house smelled of roasted nuts and warm spices. Everything looked exactly like the previous holidays, except I was no longer the same. I glanced at the wall clock. 12:15 a.m. My dad would arrive at 2 a.m. Less than 2 hours left. 2 hours that felt as long as 2 years. Lauren! Helen's sharp voice snapped me back to reality. What are you zoning out for? Go brew a fresh pot of coffee. Yes, Mom. I stood up. My footsteps were slow and steady, just as they always were. No one noticed anything amiss. But inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew that from this moment on. Every single action had to be perfectly calculated. If they suspected anything, I wouldn't be able to leave. I brought the tray of coffee out to the table. Michael was on his phone. His back was turned to me. His voice lowered, but I still caught a few sentences. Don't worry, Uncle Howard. She's going home tomorrow to ask for the money. It's just $300K. Her family has plenty to spare. I stood right behind Michael, holding the tray. My blood running cold. $300,000. They really had it all meticulously planned. Michael turned around, saw me, and smiled warmly. Oh, Lauren, sit down with us. I placed the tray on the table. Helen looked at me and clicked her tongue. Other people's daughters-in-law get to relax on the holidays, but you're always so clumsy and slow. I kept my head down. Yes. I'm sorry, Mom, Megan giggled. Don't be sad, Lauren. Mom is just joking around. She grabbed another handful of nuts. Besides, once that $300,000 comes through and our family moves up in the world, you'll be the lady of the house. I looked at her. It sounded like a teasing joke, but now I knew it was the absolute truth. $300,000. That was the price tag they had put on my life. Michael put his hand on my shoulder. Lauren, tomorrow you head to Wisconsin, okay? Mom and I already prepared some gifts for your parents. I nodded slightly. Yes. I'll talk to my parents. Michael smiled, satisfied. I knew you were reasonable. Reasonable. For 3 years, I had always been reasonable, patient, silent, and obedient. But tonight, everything was different. I glanced at the clock. 12:40 a.m. Time was crawling. A while later, Helen stood up. All right. Whoever is tired can go to bed, Megan stretched. I'm going to sleep. She walked to her room. Michael watched TV for a bit longer before standing up. Lauren, are you coming to bed? I'm feeling a little tired too. You go on ahead. Okay. I turned and walked into our bedroom. As soon as the door closed, my entire body began to tremble. I looked at the clock. 1:50 a.m. I opened my closet. Inside were the familiar clothes I had brought from my parents' house 3 years ago. Looking at them now, I realized I had never truly belonged here. I didn't pack much, just a heavy winter coat, a small duffel bag, and my phone. But before leaving, I had to do one thing. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my mobile banking app. In my personal savings account, there was exactly $300,000. It was the money my father had transferred to me over the last 3 years, meant to be my safety net. Michael knew about it. His whole family knew. They were waiting for me to voluntarily hand it over, but they didn't know the account was solely in my name, and only I had the authorization to move it. I took a deep breath and began to type. The funds were divided. A transfer to my father's account, one to my mother's, and the rest to an offshore secure trust. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. By the time I finished, my account had only a few $100s left. Staring at the screen, a massive weight lifted off my chest. 1:45 a.m. I put on my coat, grabbed my bag, and turned off the lamp. Before walking out, I paused. 3 years. 3 years of my life. I had thought this was my home, but it was just a trap. I opened the bedroom door as quietly as possible. The house was dead silent. Michael had fallen asleep on the living room sofa. I walked down the hallway, step by step, my heart racing. 1:55 a.m. The back door was located near the kitchen. I unlatched the deadbolt. The freezing winter wind immediately rushed in. I stepped out into the dark, snow-covered driveway. The only light came from a distant street lamp and the dim headlights of a black SUV idling in the shadows. The car window rolled down. I saw my father. His hair was much grayer than the last time I had visited. Lauren. His voice was hoarse. Get in! I opened the door, and the moment I sat down, the tears broke free. He grabbed my hand. It's okay. You're going home. The SUV rolled forward, slowly driving out of the cul-de-sac. I turned to look back at the house. The living room light was still on. They probably still thought I was asleep in bed. None of them knew their obedient, naive daughter-in-law was gone. My father merged onto the interstate. The cold wind seeped through the glass. I shivered. Dad, I was so stupid, wasn't I? He shook his head. No, you just trusted people. He stayed silent for a moment before adding, but from today on, you never have to endure anything for anyone again. We drove for over an hour. When we finally pulled into the driveway in Wisconsin, my mother was already standing on the porch. As soon as she saw me, she ran out. Lauren! She pulled me into a tight embrace. I could feel her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, I choked out. I made you worry. She stroked my hair. It's okay, as long as you're home. Inside, the dining table was set with leftovers from their Christmas Eve dinner, and a hot mug of cocoa was waiting for me. My mom said, I knew you'd come home. I sat down and took a sip of the warm cocoa, the heat spreading through my freezing body. My parents just looked at me. No scolding, no barrage of questions, just the comforting, quiet presence of family. A little while later, my phone buzzed. It was Michael. I stared at the screen, rejected the call, powered off the phone, popped out the SIM card, and threw it into the trash can. I looked up at my parents, my voice very soft. Mom, Dad, I want a divorce. My father nodded. I've already contacted the lawyers. My mother held my hand. Our daughter doesn't lack money, and she certainly doesn't lack love. You don't need to suffer anywhere. I looked around the familiar house. The old brick fireplace, the rustic oak dining table. This was my true home. Outside, the snow was falling. A new day, a new holiday had begun, and so had my new life. But I didn't know that the next morning, a single message from Michael would steer everything in a completely different direction. The message had only one line. Lauren, my mom is in the hospital. She wants to see you. And a few hours later, another call would come. A call I would never forget. I woke up late on Christmas morning. Probably because for the first time in 3 years, I had slept deeply. No mother-in-law banging on my door demanding breakfast, no clattering of pots and pans, no judgmental stares, just the soft winter sunlight filtering through the window of my childhood bedroom. On my old desk, there was still a framed photo from my college graduation. I was standing between my parents, smiling brightly. I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling a mixture of sorrow and immense relief. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to live in my own home. From downstairs, my mother's voice called out, Lauren, come down for breakfast, sweetie. Her voice was as gentle as ever. Coming, Mom. I walked downstairs. The table was set. My mom had made pancakes and hot coffee, exactly how I liked it. My dad was sitting there, reading the paper. Seeing me, he folded it up. Sleep well, kiddo? I nodded. Yeah. It's been a long time since I slept that well. My dad looked at me for a moment and sighed softly. That's good. My mom placed a plate in front of me. Eat up while it's hot. I picked up my fork, a warm feeling filling my chest. But right then, my mother's cell phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, then turned to me. It's Michael. I froze. The kitchen fell completely silent. My dad set his coffee mug down. Do you want to answer it? I thought for a few seconds, then nodded. I'll take it. My mother handed me the phone. I pressed accept. On the other end, Michael's voice came through, frantic and hoarse. Lauren, where are you? I stayed silent. Michael continued, his tone turning aggressive. Why the hell did you leave in the middle of the night? Do you have any idea how crazy my family has been looking for you? I replied calmly. I'm at my parents' house. The other end of the line went dead silent for a few seconds. Then, Michael lowered his voice. Lauren, don't overreact like this. If something's wrong, come home and we can talk about it. I looked out the kitchen window at the snow-covered pine trees in the yard. My voice remained flat. There's no need. I want a divorce. The air on the other side seemed to freeze. It took a long time for Michael to respond. Lauren, are you crazy? Just because my mom said a few mean things, you want a divorce? I gave a soft laugh. Do you really not know why? Michael didn't answer. I continued. $300,000. The line went completely quiet. I could hear his ragged breathing. Lauren, I don't know who told you what, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that I know everything. A long pause dragged on. Then, Michael let out a dry, forced chuckle. Lauren, you misunderstood. It's just a business deal. I was doing it for our future. I didn't want to hear another word. Michael. I addressed him formally for the last time. The $300,000 in my account. I've transferred it all away. I heard the sound of a chair scraping loudly across the floor on his end. Michael practically roared. Lauren, what the hell did you do? That is our money, I said coldly. That is my money. Money I had before we ever got married. Don't forget that. Michael was panting heavily. His voice suddenly turned dark and threatening. Lauren, do not push me. I hung up, not saying another word. My mom looked at me, worried. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine." But a moment later, my own phone, which I had turned back on with a new SIM, rang. It was Michael's number. I ignored it. It rang a second time, a third time, then stopped. I thought it was over, but half an hour later, it rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Megan. I hesitated, then answered. "Lauren?" Megan's voice was trembling. Where are you?" "My parents' house." Megan choked back a sob. Can you please come to the hospital?" I frowned. "What happened?" Through her tears, Megan cried out. "Mom!" Mom collapsed. My heart gave a sudden jolt. "The hospital? What's wrong?" Megan sobbed. "The doctor said she had a severe hypertensive crisis. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. She keeps calling your name." I fell silent, an indescribable feeling rising in my chest. My parents were looking at me. I asked, "Where is Michael?" "He's here at the hospital with me. He told me to call you." Megan's voice dropped. "Lauren, please come see her. It might be the last time. The last time." Those words made my hands go cold. I looked at my dad. He gave a slight nod. "If you want to go, I'll drive you." My mom added softly, "Regardless of everything, she is still your mother-in-law." I sat still for a few seconds, then stood up. "I'll go." My dad grabbed his coat. "Let's go." On the drive back toward Illinois, I stared out the window. The streets were empty on Christmas morning. I remembered my 3 years of marriage. There were times I truly believed that if I just tried a little harder, everything would be okay. But as it turns out, some people never change. The SUV pulled up to the emergency room entrance. Michael was standing outside. In just one night, he looked entirely different. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Seeing me get out of the car, he immediately ran over. "Lauren!" I looked at him. There was no familiarity left, only distance. "Where is she?" Michael's voice was hoarse. "Room 3. We walked into the hospital. The hallways were quiet, smelling heavily of antiseptic. Outside the hospital room, Megan was sitting on a bench. Seeing me, she jumped up. "Lauren!" Her eyes were swollen and red. I walked into the room. Helen was lying on the hospital bed, her face ghostly pale. Seeing me, she slowly opened her eyes. "Lauren." Her voice was incredibly weak. I stood perfectly still. She reached out her hand. "Come here." I stepped closer. She grabbed my hand. It was the first time in 3 years she had ever held my hand like that. "Lauren, please don't leave the family." I looked at her, not knowing what to say. She struggled to breathe. "I don't care about the money anymore. Just don't divorce Michael." I remained silent. She looked at me for a long time, her voice suddenly trembling. "Lauren, do you know, Michael truly loves you." I smiled faintly. A sad, empty smile. Helen closed her eyes. "Give me a chance, my daughter." In that moment, I realized that in 3 years, she had never called me daughter with such raw emotion. But it was too late. Too late to fix anything. I gently pulled my hand back. "I'm sorry, but some things can't be undone." Helen looked at me, her eyes filled with despair. Outside the door, Michael stood frozen. He heard everything, but said nothing. However, I didn't know that this very encounter at the hospital would uncover a secret Michael's family had hidden for 3 years. A secret that would finally explain why they chose me in the first place. I pulled my hand away from Helen. The hospital room became so quiet you could hear the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Helen stared at me, her gaze weak but clinging to a shred of hope. "Lauren, please reconsider," she whispered. But this time, I didn't feel my resolve softening. Over the past 3 years, I had heard too many empty promises, too many supposedly sincere words. Every time I believed them, The end result was always cold calculation. I bowed my head slightly. I'm sorry, Helen. I didn't even call her mom anymore. My voice lacked any trace of affection. I think it's time we stop. Michael stepped into the room. He stood by the bed, looking at me with a mix of anger and helplessness. Lauren, he said softly, can we talk in private? I glanced at my dad, who was standing by the door. He gave a brief nod. I turned back to Michael. Outside, we stepped out into the hospital corridor. It was empty, save for a few exhausted family members slumped in waiting chairs. Michael stood facing me. He looked at me for a long time. Lauren, do you really want a divorce? Yes, I answered instantly. Michael gave a bitter laugh. Do the last 3 years mean absolutely nothing to you? I looked him dead in the eye. Is it fair for you to even ask me that? Michael was silent. I continued. You know better than anyone how I lived for the last 3 years. I never needed luxury. All I wanted was respect. But your family couldn't even give me that. Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly exhausted. Lauren, I know my mom is difficult, but I always stood by your side. I let out a harsh laugh. Stood by my side? You stood by my side while you and your mother plotted how to steal $300,000 from me? Michael froze. It took him a long time to respond. Lauren, it's not what you think. Then what is it? Michael turned to look out the corridor window. The bright morning light illuminated his face. He sighed. Lauren, have you ever wondered why I pursued you so relentlessly? I stayed silent. I had thought about that question a lot. It wasn't because of the money, Michael said. I frowned. Then what was it? He turned back to me. His eyes looked strange. Because of you. You look exactly like someone. I was stunned. Who? Michael paused for a few seconds. Then he spoke very slowly. My sister. I had never heard Michael mention this. You have a sister? He nodded. I did. Her name was Lily. But she passed away. The hospital corridor felt unusually quiet. Michael continued. 3 years ago, not long before I met you, my sister died in a car accident. A truck lost its brakes. She was 7 months pregnant. I stood frozen. Michael smiled sadly. The day I first saw you at your office, my heart stopped. You look exactly like Lily when she was younger. The way you smile, the way you talk, even the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. I didn't know what to say. Michael looked down at the floor. I pursued you initially because of that. I thought that if you were by my side, I wouldn't miss her as much. I felt something heavy sink in my chest. But I still asked, and what about the money? Michael was quiet. After a long time, he finally said, I won't deny it. I thought that with that $300,000, I could start my own firm. I wanted to prove to my mother that I could be successful. I stared at him. By scamming your own wife? He didn't answer. Right at that moment, the door to the hospital room opened. Megan ran out. Michael, the doctor needs you. Michael turned back. He looked at me one last time. Lauren, I know I was wrong, but I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't reply. Michael rushed into the room. I stood alone in the hallway. My dad walked up beside me. Are you okay? I nodded. I'm okay. But inside, a very strange feeling washed over me. For 3 years, I thought he was just a greedy man, but this revelation made everything far more complicated. Less than 10 minutes later, Michael stepped back out. His face was ashen. Megan followed, her eyes red. Lauren, she whispered. Mom wants to see you again. I walked back in. Helen was breathing heavily. Seeing me, she forced her eyes open. Lauren, I stood near the bed. She looked at me for a long time before her voice trembled. Do you know why I always hated you? I didn't answer. She gave a tearful smile. Because you look so much like Lily. Looking at you, I just remembered my daughter. But my daughter is dead. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Lauren, I was terrified. I was terrified that if I loved you, one day you would leave this house too. So I constantly reminded myself, you are just a daughter-in-law, not my daughter. I stood in silence. For 3 years, I thought she hated me because I wasn't as wealthy as they wanted to be, or because I hadn't given her a grandchild yet. But it turned out there was another reason entirely. Helen struggled to breathe. Lauren, I was wrong. You've suffered so much these past 3 years. Can you forgive me? I looked at her, and a complex wave of emotion hit me. But right at that moment, my father's cell phone abruptly rang. He stepped outside to take it. A few minutes later, he walked back in. His face was deadly serious. Lauren, we have a major problem. I jumped. What is it, Dad? My father spoke slowly. Tom just called. He said our manufacturing plant was just raided by the FDA and health inspectors. Someone filed an anonymous report that our products use contaminated, substandard ingredients. I was dumbstruck. That's impossible. My father nodded. Tom said the person behind this. He paused. Is Michael's Uncle Howard. The entire room plunged into silence. I turned to look at Michael. He was looking at me, and for the first time, I saw the confidence drain completely from his eyes, replaced by a massive, looming fear. Because at that moment, none of us realized that the real nightmare was just beginning. After my dad said those words, no one spoke. The steady beep of Helen's heart monitor seemed to stretch the silence even further. I looked at Michael. He was no longer calm. Dad, did Tom explain exactly what happened? I asked. My dad shook his head. He just said a surprise inspection team showed up this morning. Someone submitted a formal complaint with evidence that our plant has been importing and using low-grade, contaminated organic soy. I reacted immediately. That's impossible. We only source from our trusted, certified vendors. Tom said the same thing. But the inspectors claim they have proof. What proof? Just then, Michael stepped forward, his face pale. Uncle Howard? My dad looked at him. Yes. Tom said the person who handed the dossier over to the authorities was Howard. Michael stood frozen like a statue. After a long pause, he muttered, No way. My uncle wouldn't do that. My dad looked at Michael. I hope not. But right now, all the signs point to him. The tension in the room was suffocating. Helen shifted weakly on the bed. What? What's going on? Michael quickly leaned over. Mom, don't worry about it. But Helen looked at me. Lauren, is your father's factory in trouble? I hesitated, then nodded. Helen closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. It's all because of this family. I didn't know what to say. My dad checked his watch. Lauren, I have to get back to Milwaukee right now. Come with me. Suddenly, Michael spoke up. I'm coming too. I turned to him. Why? If my uncle is behind this, I need to know why. My dad didn't object. Fine. Megan stood up. I'll stay here with Mom. We left the hospital. The Christmas morning sky was clear and blue, but my mood was the polar opposite of how it had been just a few hours ago. My dad drove fast on the interstate back to Wisconsin. The plant was located in a massive industrial park on the outskirts of Milwaukee. It was my father's life's work for over 20 years. I remembered running through the warehouse as a little girl, the air always smelling of roasted soybeans and sweet organic syrups. But today, when we pulled up to the gates, I saw 3 government vehicles parked out front. A group of our workers were huddled in the courtyard, looking incredibly tense. Tom, the plant manager, ran over immediately. Nathan! He nodded, a greeting to my dad, then to me. Lauren, you're here. What's the situation? My dad asked sharply. Tom sighed heavily. The FDA inspectors are in the main ingredient warehouse. The complaint alleged we used banned chemical additives in the export batch from last month. That's absurd. I interjected. Our quality control is flawless. I told them that. But they have a lab report, Tom said. What lab report? My dad demanded. At that moment, the warehouse doors slid open. 3 inspectors in official jackets walked out. The lead inspector, a middle-aged man, looked at my dad. Are you the owner of this facility? Yes, Nathan Miller. The inspector opened a folder. Mr. Miller, we received a detailed whistleblower report claiming your facility has been substituting organic ingredients with chemically treated, substandard alternatives. I assure you, that is categorically false, my dad said calmly. The inspector didn't argue. He just handed over a piece of paper. This is the preliminary lab report. I was standing close enough to read it. The report stated that sample batches contained chemical preservative levels far exceeding legal limits. My dad frowned. This is impossible. If there were an issue, our internal quality assurance team would have caught it weeks ago. We need to temporarily seal the ingredient warehouse to conduct a full audit, the inspector stated. Tom stepped up. You can audit whatever you want, but I guarantee this facility operates strictly by the book. Just then, a voice echoed from behind us. By the book? I turned around. A sleek gray Mercedes had just pulled up to the gates. The man stepping out was Howard, Michael's uncle. He was dressed in an immaculate tailored coat, a smug smile playing on his lips. Michael marched toward him. Uncle Howard. His voice was tight with anger. What are you doing here? Howard chuckled. Just checking in on the situation. He glanced at me. Lauren, good to see you. I glared at him. My dad cut to the chase. Howard, are you the one orchestrating this? Howard shrugged nonchalantly. I'm merely fulfilling my civic duty. I noticed some red flags and reported them to the proper authorities. Michael grabbed his uncle's arm. What are you talking about? Nathan's plant is spotless. Howard looked at Michael, his eyes turning ice cold. You're taking their side? Did you forget our arrangement? Hearing that, my heart lurched. Arrangement? Michael looked at me in panic. Lauren, but Howard cut him off. Lauren? He looked at me. You know, if you had just handed over that $300,000 earlier, things wouldn't have escalated to this. I was stunned. What do you mean? Howard smiled. Very simple. We were going to use that money to secure some investments, but you decided to squirrel it away. He shrugged. So, we had to find leverage another way. My dad took a step forward. Are you blackmailing us? I'm just stating facts, Nathan. Business sometimes requires aggressive tactics. I stared at him, a chill running down my spine. So this was never just about the $300,000. Howard looked at Michael. Look what you've done. You ruined the plan because of this girl. Michael clenched his fists. Uncle, you've gone too far. Howard sneered. Too far? Have you forgotten who got you your job? Have you forgotten who taught you how to drain money from your own wife? I looked at Michael. The words echoed in my head. Taught you how to drain money from your own wife. Michael lowered his head, completely silent. In that moment, I realized that even when you suspect the truth, hearing it spoken aloud still cuts like a knife. My dad said coldly, Howard, you will be held legally responsible for this. We'll see about that. Howard smirked. He turned and got back into his Mercedes. The car sped off, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. I looked at Michael, my voice barely a whisper. You knew about this from the very beginning, didn't you? Michael didn't answer. But his silence was all the confirmation I needed. I turned away, not wanting to speak to him anymore. But I had no idea that in just a few days, an even more painful truth would emerge. And this time, the person who would shock me the most wasn't Michael, but my mother-in-law. After Howard's car disappeared, the air in the courtyard felt as heavy as lead. The workers who had watched the confrontation stood in stunned silence. Some whispered among themselves, but quickly hushed when my dad turned around. My dad stood tall, but I could see his fists were clenched tight. 20 years of building this business from the ground up, and he had never faced a crisis like this. He finally turned to Michael. You said you had proof. What proof? Wait, no, I'm skipping ahead. Let me go back to the aftermath of Howard leaving, my dad asked Tom. What do we do now? My dad took a deep breath. First, We prove the plant is clean. He turned to the FDA inspectors. I request that you pull brand new samples directly from the sealed vats right now, in front of us. The lead inspector nodded. That is standard procedure. We will do that. The courtyard became a flurry of activity as the inspectors suited up to enter the warehouse. Michael and I stood near the gates. I looked at him. Do you have anything else you want to say? Michael didn't look up. The biting Wisconsin wind whipped across the pavement. Finally, he spoke. Lauren, I never thought my uncle would go this far. I gave a bitter laugh. You didn't think? Or you didn't want to think? Michael looked up, his eyes exhausted. I knew he wanted the money, but I had no idea he was planning to sabotage your dad's entire company. I stared at him, waiting, but he said nothing else. His silence was colder than the winter wind. My dad walked over. He looked at Michael. You knew about this from the start, didn't you? Michael bowed his head. Yes, just one word, but it shattered everything. My dad didn't yell. He just sighed. You know what hurts the most, Michael? It's not the money. It's the fact that I actually trusted you. Michael stood completely still. My dad turned away. Lauren, come to my office. Yes. Before I followed him, I looked at Michael one last time. He was standing alone in the middle of the massive courtyard, looking like a lost child. But I didn't want to turn back anymore. My dad's office was at the back of the administrative building. His desk was covered with familiar ledgers and production schedules. He sat down and rubbed his temples. Lauren, you see it now. Business is never simple. I sat across from him. Dad, I'm so sorry. He looked up. For what? For bringing someone like Michael into our family. He shook his head. It's not your fault. When someone is determined to con you, they will eventually find a way. He looked out the window. What matters is how we handle it. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Tom walked in. Nathan. The inspectors finished taking the new samples. How long until we get the expedited results? This afternoon. My dad nodded. Good. Tom hesitated, lowering his voice. Nathan, there's one more thing. I was talking to some of the floor workers. A few days ago, an unauthorized person was seen near the main storage silos. My dad frowned. Unauthorized person? Yes. The guy claimed he was a contractor sent by Howard. My heart pounded. If that was true, this sabotage had been planted days ago. Where was the floor supervisor? My dad asked. It was Quinn, Tom said. But he didn't show up for his shift today. My dad and I exchanged a look. Do you have his phone number? I asked. Tom nodded and dialed it immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. He might have skipped town, my dad murmured. The room grew tense. We pulled up the security feeds. On the monitors, we saw the footage from 2 days prior. A man was seen talking to Quinn before slipping into the restricted silo area. If the raw ingredients had actually been tampered with. My dad's factory was in massive trouble. Right then, my dad's phone rang. It was the hospital. He answered it. Yes, speaking. A few seconds later, his expression shifted. How is she? He listened, hung up, and looked at me. I was surprised. That's good news, but the doctor said she is insisting on seeing you. I hesitated. A strange feeling in my gut. My dad said, You don't have to go. I thought for a moment. I'll go. I'll drive you. We went back to the hospital. Megan was still outside the room, jumping up when she saw me. I walked in. Helen looked more alert than this morning. She called out faintly, Lauren, come here. I approached. She looked at me for a long time. There was no coldness left in her eyes, only regret. Lauren, do you still want a divorce? Yes, I do, I said softly. She closed her eyes, a tear escaping. Then I won't try to keep you. I was taken aback. She sighed. I've made you suffer so much. Maybe this is my karma. I didn't know what to say. But then Helen spoke again, her voice slow and deliberate. Lauren, before you go, There is something I have to tell you. What is it? She opened her eyes, looking dead serious. Do you really think Howard just wanted the $300,000? I frowned. Wasn't that it? She shook her head, her voice raspy. No, he wanted much more than that. A chill ran down my spine. What does he want? Helen looked straight at me. Every word made my heart pound harder. He wants your father's entire company. The hospital room went dead silent. I stood paralyzed, but I had no idea that wasn't even the worst part. Because in Howard's grand scheme, I was merely step one. He wants my dad's company? I repeated, my voice hollow. Helen nodded weakly. The exhaustion in her eyes was replaced by the heavy burden of a long-kept secret. Lauren, I've known about this for a long time. My dad stepped closer to the bed. He just stared at Helen. Howard didn't just come up with this, she confessed. He planned this 3 years ago. Hearing that, I felt a physical chill. 3 years ago. That was exactly when Michael started pursuing me. I looked at her. What are you saying? Helen squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them. Lauren, why do you think Michael fell for you so quickly? The question choked me. I had wondered, but never dared to dig too deep. Helen continued. Your father owns a massive manufacturing plant. Howard works in the same supply chain logistics. He knew how profitable Nathan's business was. He wanted to absorb it. My dad scowled. How? Howard originally proposed a merger, Helen said to him. My dad nodded. Yes, and I firmly rejected it. After you rejected it, he came up with another way. My heart grew heavier by the second. What way? She looked right at me. To have Michael marry you. The room froze. I stood, paralyzed. My dad was just as shocked. What did you just say? His voice boomed. Helen nodded slightly. Michael meeting you wasn't a coincidence. Howard set it up. I spun around to look at Michael, who was standing in the corner of the room, his face pale as a ghost. Did you know this? Michael shook his head frantically. Lauren, I didn't. But his eyes darted away. I knew instantly. He knew. Just maybe not the full extent of it. Lauren, Helen said. At first, Howard just wanted Michael to marry you. Then he would slowly manipulate the families into a partnership and quietly buy up majority shares. My dad clenched his jaw. So, that was it. But things didn't go his way. Helen sighed. What do you mean? I asked. Because I never agreed to the partnerships, my dad interjected. Exactly, Helen said. Howard was furious. So he switched to plan B. My heart raced. The $300,000. Yes. He told Michael to convince you to invest that money into his fake real estate fund. He was going to use your cash as seed money to launch a hostile takeover or bankrupt the factory. Everything suddenly became crystal clear. The conversations, Howard's smug attitude, the raid at the factory, it all formed a perfect, terrifying picture. A trap. I had been living in a trap for 3 years. Michael looked at me, his voice shaking. Lauren, I swear I knew I was wrong, but I never wanted to destroy your family. I looked at him. I wasn't even angry anymore, just bone-tired. Michael, I said softly, do you know what hurts the most? It's not the money, it's that you knew the truth. And you let me live a lie for 3 years. Michael had no response. Helen whispered, Lauren, I am at fault too. But right now, we have to figure out how to stop Howard. Do you know anything else? My dad asked her. Yes. Helen nodded. Howard didn't just report you to the FDA. He planted someone inside your factory. I gasped. Inside the factory? Quinn, she said slowly. The name of the missing supervisor. So that's it, my dad muttered. Howard got him hired there to act as his mole. Helen confirmed. The gravity of the situation hit us all. I looked at my dad. This is way bigger than we thought. I know, he said. But a strange intuition settled over me. If this was all true, Howard was far from finished, and sure enough, a few hours later, a call from the plant proved his endgame was much more vicious than we imagined. We rushed back to the factory. When we arrived, the police were already there. Tom ran up to us. "Nathan!" Quinn showed up. "Where is he?" my dad demanded. "The cops have him by the warehouses." We hurried over. Quinn was in handcuffs, talking to 2 officers. When he saw my dad, he looked down in shame. "What happened?" my dad asked the officer. "We received a tip about corporate sabotage. The suspect here confessed to swapping out a pallet of organic soy with chemically treated substitutes," the officer explained. I looked at Quinn. "Who paid you to do this?" Quinn was shaking. I'm sorry. Howard paid me. He said I just had to mess up one batch. The factory would get shut down for an investigation, and he would take care of the rest." My dad didn't scream. He just thanked the officers as they put Quinn into the squad car. But before we could even process this victory, Michael's phone rang. He looked at the screen, his face dropping. "Lauren, it's my uncle. He's outside the gates." I spun around. The gray Mercedes was back. Howard stepped out, adjusting his coat, looking as calm as ever. But this time, the real war had begun. Howard strolled into the courtyard. "I hear you're having a rough day, Nathan." My dad stepped up. "You should be explaining yourself to the police, Howard." "Not to me," Howard smirked. "I have nothing to explain to the police." Michael stepped forward. Quinn confessed. "Uncle! He told them you paid him!" Howard looked at his nephew with pure disdain. "You're going to take the word of a disgruntled factory worker over your own flesh and blood? He has bank transfer records!" Michael yelled. "Transfers can be misinterpreted." Howard waved a hand dismissively. He turned to my dad. "Let's cut the act. Nathan, if this factory gets tied up in an FDA and federal investigation for months, your international export contracts will be voided. The banks will call in your loans. You'll be bankrupt." "I am not afraid of you," my dad said icily. Howard pulled a sleek envelope from his breast pocket and tossed it onto a nearby shipping crate. "I have an offer. Sell the plant to me, at market value, after you tried to destroy it." My dad laughed. "Business is business." Howard shrugged. He looked at me. "You still have time to be smart about this, Lauren." I glared at him. "The police have Quinn. You're not getting away with this." Howard chuckled. "You're still so naive." He pointed to the warehouse. "The contaminated goods are in your facility. The worker can say whatever he wants to lessen his own sentence. But the liability falls entirely on the owner." My dad knew Howard was technically right. In corporate law, the facility owner bears the brunt of the liability until proven otherwise in a very lengthy court battle. "I'll give you 3 days," Howard said, turning back to his car. He looked at Michael. "Remember who you are, kid." As the Mercedes drove off, the courtyard fell silent again. My dad turned to Tom. "Send everyone home for the day. We need to strategize." Once it was just my dad, Michael, and me left in the yard. My dad asked, "Are you scared, Lauren?" "No," I shook my head. "Neither am I," he said. "I didn't build this for 20 years just to hand it over to a crook." Michael stepped forward. "Nathan, I'm sorry." "What are you going to do now, Michael?" my dad asked. Michael looked up, a newfound determination in his eyes. "I'm going to help you." "How?" I asked. "I know my uncle's weak point," Michael said. "He hides all his illicit funds in a shell company, a logistics firm. Do you have proof?" my dad asked. "Yes. I have the files on a USB drive," Michael confirmed. My dad looked at him. Skeptical but hopeful. "We need to go to the lawyers immediately." But right then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered it. "Lauren." The deep voice was unmistakably Howard's. "What do you want?" I snapped. "Just a friendly warning," Howard said smoothly. "You shouldn't meddle in things you don't understand. It's my father's company. Who else is going to step in?" Howard laughed softly. You're stubborn, just like your dad. But do you really trust Michael? I glanced at Michael, who was talking to my dad. That's none of your business. Did you know? Howard's voice dripped with poison. That 3 years ago, Michael was the one who enthusiastically agreed to my plan? My throat went dry. You're lying. Ask him yourself, Howard taunted. Ask him exactly how much money I paid him to date you. I hung up, my hands trembling. I walked over to Michael. Michael, he stopped talking. What's wrong? 3 years ago, did your uncle pay you to pursue me? The courtyard went dead silent. Michael looked at me, horrified. Lauren, yes or no? Michael looked down at his shoes. That was all I needed. How much? I asked, my voice breaking. Michael whispered. $30,000. $30,000. My 3-year marriage was bought for $30,000. My dad looked at Michael with absolute disgust. Get out of here. Nathan, please. Leave. Now. Michael looked at me, but I turned my back. He slowly walked out of the gates. I thought that was the end of it, but later that evening I got a text from him. Meet me at the Riverside Diner. I have the USB. I drove to the diner by the Milwaukee River. Michael was sitting in a booth, looking entirely defeated. He slid a small flash drive across the table. This is everything, he said. Offshore accounts, fake invoices, the whole logistics shell company. Why are you giving this to me? I asked, not touching it, because I want to make things right. He said, I know $30,000 doesn't excuse what I did, but I want you to know, the last 3 years, my feelings for you were real. I looked at the drive. I took it. Thank you. Be careful, Lauren, he warned. My uncle knows I have these files. He won't stop. Just as he said that, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Is this Lauren? A nurse asked. It's about your mother-in-law, Helen. She was just involved in an accident here at the hospital. What? I stood up, panicked. Michael jumped up too. She fell down a flight of stairs, the nurse said. Michael and I sprinted to our cars. We drove like maniacs back to Illinois. When we arrived at the ER, Megan was hysterical. Someone pushed her, Megan sobbed. A witness saw a man in a maintenance uniform push her down the stairwell. Michael's fists were clenched so hard his knuckles were white. Howard! Before we could react, Michael's phone rang. It was Howard! Michael answered it on speaker. Howard, what did you do? Michael roared. Just a clumsy accident. Howard's voice was eerily calm. If that USB makes it to the authorities, the next accident won't be an old woman falling down some stairs. He hung up. Michael looked at me, terrified. But then, a doctor walked out. Family for Helen? She's awake. We rushed in. Helen had a bandage wrapped around her head. She looked at Michael, then at me. Mom, who did it? Michael asked gently. Helen swallowed hard. It wasn't a stranger. It was Quinn. We were shocked. Quinn? But he was arrested in Wisconsin. He made bail. My dad's voice boomed from the doorway. He had just arrived, and he came straight here. I saw his face. Helen whispered. He pushed me. My dad looked at Michael. Do you still have the USB? Yes. I held it up. We are going to the FBI, my dad said firmly. Tonight. We didn't hesitate. We drove straight to the federal field office in Chicago. The data on the USB was the smoking gun. It detailed millions of dollars in wire fraud, corporate sabotage, and racketeering. Within 48 hours, the FBI raided Howard's logistics firm and his estate. He was arrested on federal charges. Quinn, realizing he was facing attempted murder charges for pushing Helen, flipped on Howard and confessed to everything, including the factory sabotage. A week later, the FDA officially cleared my dad's organic food plant. Operations resumed, and the export contracts were saved. Standing in the courtyard of the factory, listening to the hum of the machinery, I finally felt like I could breathe again. My dad put a hand on my shoulder. You see, Lauren? If you keep your integrity, you'll always remain standing. A few days later, I went back to the hospital. Helen was recovering well. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Lauren, what have you and Michael decided? We filed the divorce papers, I said softly. She nodded, crying openly now. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at the woman who had made my life miserable for 3 years. I realized she was just a broken mother, acting out of grief and fear. I don't hold any anger toward you anymore, I said. A month later, I moved the last of my things out of the house in Oak Park. Michael was standing in the driveway. I'm sorry, Lauren, he said. I know, I replied. Will you be okay? I looked down the street, at the bright morning sun reflecting off the melting snow. I'll be fine. I'm moving forward. I got into my car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, Michael grew smaller and smaller until he disappeared completely. A 3-year marriage ended just like that. No screaming, no dramatic vengeance. Just 2 people walking in opposite directions. Money can buy a lot of things in this world, but it can never buy back broken trust. If I were to sit here as a narrator, sharing this story with all of you listening today, the first thing I would say is that we shouldn't rush to judge who is entirely right or entirely wrong. Life is always vastly more complex than the surface of any story. In this story, there is greed, there are catastrophic mistakes, and there is profound weakness. But there is also courage when the truth is finally dragged into the light. Lauren lost 3 years of her youth to a marriage founded on a calculated business transaction. That is the true tragedy. Not the money, not the betrayal itself, but the fact that her pure trust was weaponized against her. In life, trust is like a patch of fertile soil. If you plant the right seeds, flowers will bloom. But if you plant the wrong ones, you'll grow thorns that leave you bleeding for years. What is truly remarkable about Lauren isn't how much abuse she endured, but how she acted when the blindfold was removed. She didn't let her heart drown in vindictive hatred. She chose to walk away, to stand tall, and to protect her family with absolute grace and integrity. In today's world, many believe that being strong means destroying your enemies. But true strength is not losing yourself after you've been deeply wounded. Michael is a character who evokes both anger and pity. He was wrong the moment he accepted $30,000 to manipulate a woman's heart. He was wrong for staying silent for 3 years. But Michael also represents the agonizing human conflict between family loyalty and personal conscience. Not everyone is born evil. Many simply slide down a slippery slope of bad choices until they feel they can't turn back. But Michael did stop. He handed over the evidence, knowing it would destroy his uncle and cost him everything. He chose the truth. They may never reconcile, but his final act of choosing what was right is worth acknowledging. In life, people make terrible mistakes. But what defines them is whether they have the courage to try and fix them. Howard's story is a tale as old as time. There are people who spend their entire lives chasing wealth, only to have that very wealth drag them into the abyss. Ambition isn't inherently evil, but when ambition eclipses basic human morality, it turns a person into a monster willing to destroy anyone in their path. Howard didn't fail because he lacked intelligence. He failed because he forgot a fundamental truth. A fortress, built on a foundation of lies and cruelty, will inevitably collapse. And Helen, the mother-in-law, is the tragic portrait of a woman whose heart was sealed shut by the trauma of her past. She lost a daughter and saw a ghost in her new daughter-in-law. Instead of offering love, she built a wall of cruelty out of the sheer terror of experiencing that loss again. Sometimes, people hurt others not out of malice, but because they have never learned how to heal themselves. If she had only opened her heart sooner, things might have been entirely different. But life doesn't offer what-ifs. We can only learn from what has already happened. If this story leaves us with anything, it is 3 simple, universal lessons. First, never enter a marriage based on calculation. A marriage can survive a lack of money, a lack of a nice house, and a lack of luxury. But if it lacks sincerity, it will quickly become a hollow shell. Second, when you realize you are in a toxic, deceitful relationship, do not be afraid to walk away. Walking away is not a failure. Often, it is the only way to salvage your dignity and your soul. And finally, life will always give you a chance to correct your mistakes, but that window doesn't stay open forever. The sooner you own up to your wrongs, the lighter the price you will ultimately have to pay. To everyone listening, Lauren's story might just be a narrative to some, but somewhere out there, people are living through these exact nightmares. People are standing at impossible crossroads, suffering in silence, desperate for advice, or just someone to listen. If you have your own story, a burden you haven't been able to share, we are always here to listen. Feel free to send your real-life stories to our program. You never know, your story might be the exact beacon of light someone else needs to navigate their own dark times. And if you have thoughts, advice, or reflections for Lauren, Michael, or anyone in this story, please share them with our community. Sometimes, an outsider's perspective is exactly what we need to see our own lives more clearly. If today's story gave you something meaningful to reflect on, support our channel so we can continue bringing you these real-life narratives. Stories that might make us sad, might make us think, but ultimately help us understand the human condition a little better. For now, I wish you all a peaceful evening. And remember, no matter how many trials life throws your way, always keep your heart kind, and always place your trust where it truly belongs.